Welcome to the Lazy CEO Podcast, where Jim Schleckser, author of Great CEOs Are Lazy and founder of the CEO Project, features compelling experts and topics for CEOs of mid to large-size companies. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome, everybody, to another Lazy CEO podcast. My name is Jim Schleckser. I am your host, and I am the founder of the CEO Project. Hey, well, today we're going to talk about measurement. KPI, OKR, MOUSE. We're going to talk about all those different things and, why they're important, how you develop them, and maybe how to let them not rule your life, but be part of your life as well. And spent a lot of time in, using metrics and measurements and so forth in the various companies I've ran. And, I'm going to share a few sort of secrets and lessons learned that I picked up over time as I did this. So why don't we just start with the first sort of question, which is like, why? Why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we have KPIs? Why do we have measurements? Why is this important? And it turns, like any process, in a business is a process. We talk about that in my book, Great CEOs Are Lazy. You want to instrument the process. You want to understand what's going on in the process. Why? One is to make sure you're not going off a cliff, right? So if there's some catastrophic issue that's developing, your measurement is an early warning system to tell you that, hey, we got a problem on our hands that we need to fix, right? Some red lights are flashing and we got a problem. If you didn't have a measurement system, that shows up in evil ways, which would be, for example, your customers would be calling you and saying, hey, you got a problem because whatever service or product or you delivered to me wasn't what it was supposed to be. The quality wasn't right. It wasn't on the right time. It wasn't whatever. And so that's not a great answer. It's funny enough, a long time ago, I sold instrumentation systems basically for telecommunication networks. And our clients were primarily the ILEC, so Verizon and so forth. And they were very intent on having sophisticated measurement capability in their networks. Understand what's going on, where the problem is, how to fix it, so forth. They spent hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars on that every single year to improve the performance of their network through monitoring. Well, funny enough, we went to the cable companies and said, hey, you guys are running basically a telecommunication network, broadband data, telecom, and video. You need to put an instrumentation system in that tells you where your problems are and when you have a problem. And they go, aha, no, we don't. We're not putting anything in. When something doesn't go right, our customers call us and tell us that something isn't going right. So we've got millions of sensors, millions of instruments out in there, and they're called our customers. So there's a very different model of how you do that. And I think, based on how we all feel about our cable company, you might say that having a little bit of instrumentation and measurement is probably a better answer than the second. The other reason, though, is for improvement. In other words, when things aren't achieving goal, when things aren't quite as good as they could be, and I'm not talking about going off the cliff now, I'm just talking about our process of continuous improvement in our organization. Measurement allows you to say, hey, we're on track or off track, or we need to double down on that or spend more time on it and so forth. So I'm a big fan of measurement. There's an old saying that goes, if what is measured is improved. And so if you want to improve something, you measure it. So let's just start at categories of measurement. First is sort of the backward looking measurements that you might have in your business. And that would be things that talk about what has already occurred. They're non-predictive, but they are interesting. They do sort of inform us at some level that what we did last month, let's say, was good, bad, and different, and maybe we need to change something in the going forward month. A classic example of a backward-looking, out the rear view mirror, if you will, or out the rear window, is financial metrics. Financial metrics are not forward-looking; they're backward-looking. That's your scorecard after you finished your round of golf. It doesn't tell you about the next shot in any way, shape, or form. And it might inform your next round a little bit. Oh, I noticed I did a lot of putting, or I did a lot of whatever. So I'm going to try to change that next time. So financial measurements, everybody has those, and that's sort of the most fundamental metric you might have in a business. But they are all backward-looking measurements. They are not forward-looking measurements. A forward-looking measurement would be something that's more tied to your strategy, for example. And that would be, for example, I was trying to enter Europe as when I was in this telecommunication business, and most of our clients were buying tens and twenties and hundreds of millions of dollars of product, as I talked about before. But in the process of entering Europe, I said, we can't use the same metrics there. What we want to do is have something that indicates that we are directionally correct. So we started measuring things like presentations, proposals, demos, and even like early prototype orders, one or two that's going to hopefully turn into 100 or 1,000. Because while I didn't have any financial metrics, which would be backward looking because those were zero effectively, these forward looking metrics said you're heading in the right direction. For example, the rate of demo is increasing, the rate of quotation is increasing, the rate of prototype orders is increasing. And all things being equal, those things should say in the future, financial performance and therefore penetration into Europe, which was our strategic initiative, should be in the right direction. But the biggest thing for me is, if you're going to become a learning organization, an organization that tries to adapt and learn from the data around it, a measurement system is critical. Obviously, we learn from data coming from outside the organization in, but how do we learn about the internal data that's generated, the internal processes? And that's where, metrics show up. And that's particularly appropriate when you're trying to run what I would call an adaptive strategy approach. In other words, you have a fairly dynamic market. Obviously, we're going to plan a direction for the company, but we know that the minute we deploy it, it's going to start changing the second we deploy it. And we're adaptive in our approach to strategy. So the data that's generated from a metric system is really informative to changes to your strategy, both your implementation method, but also potentially your overall strategic plan can be modified based on what you learn from your measurement system. And maybe the last thing before we dig into a couple of particular measurement methodologies is the iterative nature of a metric system. So if you don't have one, or if you have a low maturity measurement system, don't sweat it. When people are trying to design KPIs or whatever model they happen to be using, they get all tense about, gosh, is it the perfect measurement? And my view on that is no, it never is. And so what you do is you put something up there, you begin to gather data on it, and pretty quickly, a month or two, depending on the cycle at which you're collecting data, you'll go, hey, that isn't quite measuring what we think it's measuring, and it's not giving us the information we need. Let's modify it in this way. And so over time, and I'm going to say it takes, the better part of a year to really iterate your measurements till you really get some to go, okay, that really means something. When that number is going in the right direction, the business is going in the right direction, our customers are happy, all these good things happen, but you don't get that on the first draft. It takes a couple of drafts and balled up, prior versions on the floor before you get to one that can actually do the job. So just don't look for perfect. Just put something up there and know that you're going to iterate it. And over time, you'll iterate to something that's really interesting and useful to your particular business. And that kind of is the secret sauce. Trying to find measures that are highly indicative of what's happening in your business, and they're elegantly simple. Those are the good ones. I'll give you an example. When I ran the telecommunication company, one of the things we measured was DSL service lines. I know it's a few years back. And the analyst, and so we measured that kind of system, and the analyst would say, gee, that means if I measure how many DSL modems are put into place effectively, I'll be able to predict your future revenue because, let's say 50 modems equals one of your product, or 100 of yours equals one of yours. and off we go. It turns out it was more complex than that, but they were looking for that elegantly simple predictive index of what my revenue was going to be in the future. Turns out it's harder than you think. So let's go to a couple of models of measurement, and these are ways that people deploy measurement systems that you might contemplate. So the first one is KPIs, key performance indicators. These are, normally kind of backward looking financials, measurements, throughput, cycle time, first pass quality, safety incident rate, utilization rates. They're all kind of backward looking, but they're valuable. So I'm all over KPIs. I like them. I've used them before. So these are just the key instrumentation on each of our processes. It tells us how we did in the last period, last month, last week, yesterday, depending on, again, how quickly you're collecting data. And they're informative. They do help you. If we take an action, we should see, with a little bit of a lag, we should see those numbers moving in the right direction. I'm kind of a simple guy. I like very graphic versions here. So while we might have targets, I usually like to see kind of a dashboard with red, yellow, green, right? Green is we're making our objective. Yellow is we're within some percentage of making our objective. Red is we're below that target percentage and there's a bit of a problem there. From a management team's point of view, using these sort of backward looking KPIs at least allows us to know where to focus our time. In the old days, I used to have a gigantic bulletin board on the wall, actually near the restroom, so everybody would walk by it. And it had all of our key metrics. We updated them regularly, red, yellow, green. So somebody could, at a glance, you could almost kind of like half close your eyes and look at it. Is there a lot of green or a lot of red? And it would tell you how the business is doing pretty accurately, actually. But I think the other element within using KPIs is creating that visibility. And visibility where somebody has a line of sight from their behaviors to that KPI. So if I'm in a work cell or I'm in a particular work unit or a product development unit or a service unit team, let's say, I want to have the local KPIs for my particular team, for my particular process, highly visible to that team. So they know exactly where they stand. If you go through call centers, you'll see big, TVs on the wall with, how many calls we made in the last hour, what was the pickup rate, how long was the average call, what was the hang up rate, and so forth. And even sometimes a little bit of competition. Here's how many, calls Jim made last hour, Sharon made last hour, Bruce made last hour, and so forth. So we all kind of know where we stand in the rank table to build a little competitive nature. But that little pod of, whatever 10 or 20 people on the phones all the time know exactly how their pod is performing, but even more, they know exactly how they're performing and how their performance ties to that KPI. So through their behaviors, they can make that number get red, yellow, or green pretty directly. So line of sight, local provision of data. As we move up the organization, and this is the other element about metrics, we can have personal metrics, like what are my measurements? What's my team's measurements? What's the organization's measurements? So there are levels of KPIs when you think about deploying them. I think the key thing on KPIs is don't go for too many. I talked to some organizations and they've got these spreadsheets that go on forever and ever. They got 137 KPIs. And I go, look, if you got 137 KPIs, you might as well have no KPIs. It's really almost too many for a normal human being to wrap their brain around. I kind of like in a team level, 3, 4, 5, at organizational level, 10 to 20 of fairly high level KPIs. So, and for me, fits on one page, either one screen, one page. I can see all my KPIs. I know what's going on. So don't go nutsy cuckoo on this. You only need two handfuls of KPIs to know what's going on in your business. The next one, and this was sort of the evolution of KPIs, was to what's called the balanced scorecard. So the balanced scorecard said, hey, everybody's been looking at financial metrics. Love that, even though they're backward looking. And maybe they have some internal metrics, but there are other interest groups here, stakeholders, if you will, and we should be measuring elements around them as well. And that's the concept of balance, right? They would say that the purely quantitative sort of ones and the financial ones are out of balance, and therefore we try to develop a balanced scorecard that incorporates other factors. So what are those other factors? Well, there's usually four elements in a balanced scorecard. One is financial. They do that, right? So that's profit, return on assets, gross margin, whatever the key ones might be for your particular business. Internal metrics, these would be measurement of your process. In a manufacturing operation, this might be something like on-time delivery, it might be inventory levels, it might be inventory accuracy, it might be machine utilization, so forth. But here's where, and those would be typical KPIs, by the way. Most companies would have those kind of KPIs. I certainly did when I was running a business, one of my manufacturing businesses. But they extend this to customer. So what are the customer measurements that are critical? And this would be things like, it might include some marketing elements. For example, what's my cost of customer acquisition, right? What does it cost to acquire a new client? What's the lifetime value of a customer? What's my retention rate of clients? In other words, how many do I lose every year if I'm a renewal type of business? What's my customer satisfaction if we do rate that, or net promoter score? So those would be pretty typical customer measurements that you would integrate into your scorecard to know how your business is doing. And frankly, if your internal metrics are green, your customer metrics should be green, as should your financial metrics. So these things are all kind of linked together, which I'll get to in a minute. The last one that they would include in a balanced scorecard would be sort of internal talent oriented or learning and growth oriented metrics. And this is really around the talent, the people in your organization, which is another stakeholder group. You want to measure how they're doing. And this might be things like retention. What is my turnover rate? What is my employee satisfaction or engagement rate? One of the things we used to measure is the percentage of revenue spent on training and development, because we wanted to invest in our people. We thought that was important. It turns out it's actually really hard to spend a lot of money on talent and development to do it smart. And so we measured it. So we stayed focused on it as a critical metric. And again, the talent is happy and well developed with low turnover. The internal metrics are going the right way, which should lead to good, happy customers, which should lead to financial. So these things are inextricably linked. And if one chunk is red, you got to get worried about it. Let's say internal or employees are red. We got big turnover. We're not doing our training. We've got safety issues, for example. That's going to turn up in internal problems. It's going to then turn up in customer problems, which will then turn up in financial. So balanced scorecard is trying to get us away from just financial backward looking, but there's some things that might be a little more forward looking and a little more holistic how we think about the business. All right. So the evolution of the balanced scorecard was to something called strategy maps. And strategy maps, so take balanced scorecard one level up, maybe level and a half up. They start with the strategic goal that we've got in the organization. And that might be grow the company to $10 million, making that up, right? So that's our goal. And you look through those same exact four areas: financial, internal, customer, and learning and development. And within those goals, there's going to be sub goals in each of those areas. If we're going to go to $10 million, we've got to have enough capital to grow to that level. We've got to double the capacity of our professional services organization. And on the learning and development, it might be therefore we need to hire, and onboard 20 new consultants. Making that up, but that's sort of the point. And we have to maintain high customer satisfaction, or we're bleeding them. We've got a leaky bucket. Every time we put some more customers in, some leak out the bottom. We don't want that if we're going to try to get to $10 million. So you can see that there's a cascade and a linkage of the overarching goal of the business into specific goals within each of those four areas. And then those are translated into KPIs, right? So let's say we're going to hire 20 people. By when? So 5 a quarter, let's say, and there's your KPI. Have we hired 5 people per quarter, which stacks up to 20, which allows us to help achieve our $10 million goal. So goals, Overarching goal translates to sub goals, translates to KPIs and specific projects to drive those results. Again, completely visible. And as I said, it takes it to the next level because balanced scorecard is just sort of a measurement of how we're doing, but there's really not a linkage to our overarching strategic goals of the company. And that's where a strategy map comes in. It's sort of balanced scorecard plus strategic goals linked together. And there's a linkage between the sub goals, as I said before: happy people, better internal process; happier customers, better financial result. That's one linkage. There are other linkages that might need to happen as well. So that's strategy maps. I kind of like those. I like the fact that it's a little more sophisticated. It isn't just measuring backward looking, it's sort of forward looking. It's tracking to our strategy on the attainment of the strategy with very specific projects and owners, by the way, of each of those projects. Creates visibility and accountability that is sometimes missing in organizations. And other times that what people struggle with is they go, hey, I'm doing this thing, but I don't know how it connects to the bigger objectives we have in the organization. And the use of a strategy map allows them to say, okay, now I get it. I'm deploying this new piece of equipment or this new software. I'm doing that so we can train people faster because we're about to hire 20 more people to help achieve our financial objective. So me deploying this software or setting up new PCs for people is directly connected to achieving our financial goal that we all want to achieve because we get, big bonuses or, we've been promised a picnic or whatever the thing is that's on the table for people. And so that linkage, that visible linkage that people take home with them, I think is really important in a strategy map. Again, super visible. You can do that on a bulletin board if you're old school, preferably probably in a digital scorecard. And again, it can be one page, pretty simply, even for a fairly sophisticated organization. This is one page. There's also software out there that will help you do this if you don't want to kind of roll your own. So it's easy enough to build strategy maps on your own. The last one, and this is sort of the current popular one, and there are a couple of variants on this, but it's called OKRs. So this is objectives and key results. A lot of people use this. It's very similar to a couple of operating system models that are out there, Traction being one of them. There's others as well. But the idea here, and the big thing that, let me go back, OKRs really came from Intel. It's a Silicon Valley kind of model, and it's very sprint oriented. OKRs are like a quarter. They're fairly short time frame of what you're looking at. And so you think about Silicon Valley, like if you went to Silicon Valley and said, hey, what's your 5-year plan? I think they'd probably laugh at you. But if you said, what are you going to do this quarter? Well, they darn well should know that, right? And have everybody mobilized against it. And maybe they know what's going to happen in a year, but it's such a dynamic environment that long-term planning really isn't necessarily what they're all about. Kind of directionality is what they're about, with an iterative process inside that. OKRs play very well into that. So it was developed by Andy Grove at Intel. It was later sort of popularized by Peter Thiel, who's one of the big venture capitalists there, who broke got the claim to fame of having broken the IRA system by putting penny stock Google in there, and when it became worth billions, he had a multi-billion-dollar IRA sitting there, and government didn't like that much. So anyway, he broke the system. But he popularized this OKR, and all of the firms that they invest in use them. So what is it? Well, the first is objective. What are we going to accomplish in the next quarter? And that might be add 5 clients. Our objective is to add 5 clients. So then I go, all right, how? Which is the 3 to 5, and it's only 3 to 5 when you're looking at these things. Key result areas that will allow us to accomplish add 5 clients or add 3 clients in the next quarter. They're all observable, so the whole SMART thing is true. This is specific, measurable, attainable, results oriented. I don't remember what it was. Results oriented and time based, I think it is. Short, 1 quarter. Sometimes they roll to a second or third, but almost always they're sort of 1 quarter focused. It's a sprint. So it's a series of 1 quarter sprints that you're working on with OKRs. The key thing here, though, is that it is a collaborative negotiation with the team of what the OKRs are. And that is super important. And I think that's really the most desirable element of OKRs, is that there is a process with procedural justice that allows people to build consensus and commitment to the objectives, because they helped build them and negotiate them and agree them. So it's really hard to say, hey, well, ain't my objective. No, no, no. You were in the meeting. It is your objective. You agreed to it. You had the conversation. Now, this can be a little difficult if you have a hierarchical structure in your business to do OKRs. You have to have a more collaborative, kind of a shared leadership model in your organization for OKRs to work. But if you do, you're sort of team-based and more collaborative, there is sort of a back and forth catch ball process to establish the objective and what the key result areas might be. So team-based, accountable, transparent, reviewed regularly, like weekly, daily, to ensure that we're on track, that we don't have to intervene in this. Now, this is really good, and this works kind of at low levels and high levels. So if I take OKRs at the top level of the corporation, you can see pretty quickly that I could cascade those OKRs down into teams and even down into individuals. So you're using the same exact sort of system of objectives and key results up and down the organization. I think this is a great way to think about, are we deploying our strategy? Are we accomplishing our objectives? Are we driving hard to our objectives in a very short-term way, in a relatively agile way? But I think you're missing what you get from like KPIs and balanced scorecard. So maybe the answer here is a blended approach. Some OKRs, which is more about sort of the talent, keeping them on point and keeping them aligned to the strategy with objectives and key results. And then also sort of a broad-based measurement of the performance of the organization. I would say balanced scorecard is a lot about running the business and the ongoing performance of the business. OKRs are more about the go forward stuff. This is about the changes that we're making to improve the business and keeping track of those. So one is ongoing, how we doing, baseline and improved baseline. And the other is tracking the projects, tracking the efforts that should drive those performance numbers upward. So I kind of think you need both, either balanced scorecard and OKRs at the same time. And by the way, it's really simple because they're observable. It's a yes, no, right? So we said we're going to hire 5 people in the quarter. Yes, no. Did we? Didn't we? Period. There's not a lot of gray in these things if you set the objectives up correctly and the key result areas correctly. It's either it happened or it didn't happen. Did we add 3 clients? No, we added 1. Then it's a no. It's very kind of black and white in terms of how they think about things. I think that's most of it. When people talk about measurement, those are the systems that they tend to talk about to use. If you don't have one, my recommendation is start now. It'll be ugly. In a year, it'll be way better. I think this is an area where you can pick and choose. I'll do a little of what I would call KPIs. I'll do a little bit of OKRs, and off we go. Oh, one other thing on OKRs before we go end here. We've got a view on project management, this is effectively a project management system, that when you're managing a project, the question you need to ask in entering it, if you have an objective, is what must be true for that objective to be attained? And specifically, when you're thinking about that, you're thinking about the risk factors that may cause it not to perform. So, for example, I want to add 5 clients with this new offering I've got. Well, I've got to verify that the price is going to be acceptable to customers, or I'm never going to get 5, let alone 50 customers. So early in the cycle, it might be verify that the price is acceptable to customers before I get crazy marketing and trying to line up 50 clients. I don't want to try to line up 50 clients and then find out the price is unacceptable. I've already kind of talked to them all. I've marketed them all. I've set up meetings, and then I find out the price is unacceptable. You need to figure that out early in the cycle. Another example is we worked with a firm that builds a mechanical product, and they made some engineering changes to one element of the mechanical product. Turns out it was a critical piece of the performance of the product. And they built the entire thing. They designed it. They machined it. They manufactured it. They made prototypes. They began to use them, and they go, oh, son of a gun, that newly designed crazy thing we did doesn't work. What they should have done is figured that out early in the cycle, because when you're going to change like that and you're not sure, they should have figured that out before they spent all the time, effort, money to build everything out to a full product, and then they tested it. They should have tested it early and cheap, figured out that wasn't acceptable, modified it, and then went forward with the full design. So it's a way of mitigating issues by figuring out if the high risk factors can be resolved early when you're thinking about OKRs. So that's it. That's measurement. KPIs, balanced scorecard, strategy maps, OKRs, all acceptable. And there's others out there, but they're all sort of variants of these four that I talked to, and usually branded. This is the Jim Schleckser version of this, which you never know, I might come up with one. But anyway, you may be using one of those already. So I hope that's helpful. It's not the most exciting topic in the world, but if you don't have measurement, you need it. If you're not measuring the key things that tell you you're going to be successful, you should. And, don't sweat it if it's not perfect. Let's change it and make it better for next month. On that note, thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time on the Lazy CEO Podcast. Bye. This podcast is brought to you by the CEO Project. At the CEO Project, we work with CEOs to help them grow their business. And our members represent billions of dollars of revenue and profit. And frankly, amongst all of us, we've probably made every mistake in the book, including some you haven't made yet. So if you want to learn from the experience of a bunch of really seasoned CEOs, we're a great place to hang out. In this podcast, what you're going to hear are some of those ideas, concepts, and things that are just going to help you on your journey. If you want to find out more, reach out to us at theceoproject.com, or you can contact me personally at jim@theceoproject.com. Happy listening.
Thanks for listening to the Lazy CEO Podcast. We'll see you next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes, and check out our website, www.theceoproject.com.